Today on Tricrow Studios, we do a high gain amp shootout between the Mesa Boogie Mark V 90 watt head and the ENGL Fireball 100. Now I'd like to reiterate here, this is a high gain amp shootout, so you're not going to hear any cleans, any mild breakups, or, soft jazz. This is high gain geared towards metal. So I do have two sound samples for you today, the first of which is a more balanced EQ type setting with the Mark V boosted and the Fireball not boosted whatsoever in drop C. And then the second sound sample shows no amp boosted in drop B with a more scoop type setting. Alright, so there you go. There are the two sound samples for the high gain amp shootout between the Mesa Boogie Mark V 90 watt and the ENGL Fireball 100. So it's at this point in the video where I do like to go over kind of what I've gained from doing a shootout like this. And I do have to say I've owned the Fireball 100 now for I think it's like 8 or 9 months. And it is quickly climbing up the ladder of, like, you know, favorable high gain amps that I do own. The Mark V I've owned for years and years and years, and I do also have a Mark IV, which I do sort of prefer to the Mark V. But I kind of knew what I was going to be getting into when I was doing this shootout. The Mark V, because I've known it for years and years and years, I sort of have certain settings that I go with quite often. And this was one where I sort of changed things up. So because the Fireball there's a lot of high end and a lot of low end. A little more compared to like a dual rectifier or the Mark V, which both of those amps are very famous for. But the Fireball, I find the low end and the high end are just a little more pronounced. And it can be quite a stark comparison when you're going from one to the other. So for the Mark V, I ended up really increasing the treble on the channel side rather than just on the EQ slider. Usually I have my treble somewhere around like noon or 1 o'clock. But here I had it increased quite a bit. Just to kind of combat the difference. But what I was also finding, and I think this is more of a me thing, just because I've owned the Mark V for so long. When I was going from the Mark V to the Fireball, I kept feeling like, oh, I really have to tame the low end, and I really have to tame the high end. So I did kind of go back and forth on what setting I wanted to use on the Fireball, just because every time I would bring down the low end and bring down the high end, I would find that it didn't seem like I had enough energy going on with it. And when I would bring it back in, it would seem like the low end seemed a little flubby. But the Fireball 100 is not an amp that you'd really want to use TS9 or any type of boost with to tame that low end. It can be favorable, but it just does so well on its own. And it doesn't really bring too much more to the table. And I do want to address boosting the Mark V. So what I generally do is I'll try it without, and then I'll try it with the boost. And you'll just see, or I'll see what suits me while I'm recording and what suits the overall effect of what I'm going for. So what I usually find is it does bring in a little more attack and a little more early saturation without bringing that gain higher and higher to achieve that effect. But at the same time, you don't. It helps the low end as well not be overtaking as like in your setting and in your playing. But it really does depend. It is one of those things where you really have to try both, and you're not always going to want to boost, and sometimes you do want to boost it. It just makes sense to try with and without with any type of Mesa Boogie amp. Anyway, I really don't want to ramble at this point. I consider myself extremely lucky to own both of these amps and all of the gear that I do own. I think both of these amps, to be very honest, I don't think they would really complement themselves extremely well. Like if one person had a Mark V and one person had a Fireball, I think what that would do is the guitar players in the audience would be like, wow, they've spent a lot of money on their gear. But at that point, you're really, both the guitar players may be fighting for space at that point. So bringing in like a Marshall and an ENGL, or like a Friedman and an ENGL, or Marshall and a or you know what I mean, a Marshall and a Mesa and a Friedman and a Mesa, something like that would really help fill things out, and would just kind of fill things out. That's all I gotta say. I don't want to talk anymore. I'm pretty tired. Anyway, thanks for watching.